I'm Joanne Wilson, and this is Positively Gotham Gal. Real, honest, and meaningful conversations with women entrepreneurs and their approach to life, business, and everything in between. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm really looking forward to talking to you today. We're just going to chat. I mean, your experience, from what I understand and what I've read, is so unique in terms of being sort of radicalized and then realizing what had happened and then going to the completely other side of seeing how you can do something to sort of unwind that. Can you kind of talk about how that ended up, that journey started, and how you got to that sort of aha moment?
Yeah, definitely. So we're going back 20 odd years ago. I was on university campus. Most university students are really interested in a cause, or, it's a time when you're thinking, you're trying to find yourself, and you want to. I came from a place of wanting to do good in the world, like wanting to change it. And the questions I was asking were not being answered by anyone apart from certain groups and certain people. The issue of the war in Chechnya and Bosnia, the things in Iraq that were happening at the time, the things that were happening in Palestine and Israel. All of these issues were, issues that I wanted to discuss, but I couldn't find anywhere.
No one was discussing them, or no one was discussing how you saw them?
No one was really discussing it in the way that was solution orientated.
Okay.
You see what I mean? It was like talking about, like, what can we do? How can we save this? How can we, have a solution? And what was offered to me at the time was, if we could come together as a united, body of Muslims and fight for our rights and fight for the ability to look after our own resources and live under a just system, then that is what will be a solution, where we can take over our own affairs and not allow the meddling of Western countries taking our resources. And that seemed fair for me. That seemed like, actually, that's true. And then I could see it was, explained to me that this is an attack on your faith, and attack on all of the Muslims, and we have to stop this. So I was coming from a place of more like an ideological idea of Islam, and the spiritual was completely taken away. But it seemed to me that I was helping the world in this way, like the people who were suffering in these circumstances could be helped by, having a just system. And I kind of saw this utopia of, like, we'll go in and we'll help all of these people, the children, the women, and we'll empower them. And it was a huge naivety, but seemed something that was possible and feasible at the time. And it was connected to the faith as well. Whenever you connect anything to faith, that's like a power battery. And they used that because I was somebody who was, motivated by my faith, and it was misdirected, which is
Right.
what I've realized later on.
Which happened for millions of years.
Yeah, exactly. This is not new, I know that, but it's like, it's something, yeah, you have to go through it to know it. It's a bit like childbirth. You can't really explain it until you've been through it. And so I was just in that space. And then, it was always from a really good intention. It was never evil or malicious in any way. It was really, I was thinking I was helping. And then you have, as I got older and wiser, and had seen certain things, and I'd had my own children, I started to, rethink about stuff and realize that actually maybe this isn't the way forward. Maybe this isn't what I should be doing. And
how
then,
did you unravel yourself out of that?
well, I think it was a mix of just, thinking that this was all like completely infallible, and people who were working on this cause were perfect, and then realizing that that wasn't the case, that this was absolutely and utterly ridden with flaws, and it wasn't what I was expecting, or what I initially thought it was. And when the 7/7 bombings happened in London near where I lived, that was the aha moment, as you said, like, oh my God, this is not what I want. This is not what I signed up for. This is not what I want in the world. This is not what I want for my children. there's something seriously wrong here with what I was trying to achieve before. And I had that collaboration and managed to get myself out of it. And imagine someone's been in this for an entire decade. That in itself is a difficult thing to do. So coming out of it was a little bit like coming out of a coma, when you're just like, oh my gosh, like what have I been doing? And realizing that I needed to take a different route.
Right. It was probably like being, in a war where you've been inside a bunker and all of a sudden, you come out and you see the sun and you're just like, wow, I've been underground for 10 years. How am I going to move forward in my life?
Exactly. And that was a really difficult moment, but I knew that it was something I had to do. And it was the only way that I was going to move forward in my life. And a realization that I'd, made a mistake and that I needed to change things around. And I didn't want that 10 years to be an entire waste. So maybe I was meant to go through those things so then I could destroy it, or tackle it and challenge it properly. It's like you'll never, people can study it inside out, but you'll never know until you're there.
Right.
And so,
you were totally inside of it. You're now a specialist, right, in terms of, counter extremism for women. Why are they targeted differently? We've all read the articles of young women that they seem super happy in their homes and the parents are completely oblivious. And then all of a sudden they end up on the other side of the globe, that they've been recruited for something that nobody understands how they got there.
Yes, well, that was what was eye-opening for me, because I dedicated the past 16 years of my life trying to stop people from joining these groups. So even prior to Daesh recruiting young women, I was trying to do that. And it so happened to be that I was placed in, a scenario where anybody who was trying to join ISIS came to me. Not anybody, but like a whole load of young girls in 2014 happened to come to me. And I had the difficult task of trying to stop them from, going down that route and trying to understand how Daesh had infiltrated and brainwashed these kids. And it was on a different level to what I was used to. It was like, it was nowhere near of the types of recruiting that I was used to seeing. It was like recruiting on speed. I can't explain it anymore. It's just within a few weeks, months, these girls were going, like you said, from happy-go-lucky young kids to getting on a plane and going in to join this barbaric organization. How did they get from A to B? And I've been in a position where I've seen over 100 young girls and boys and families in that situation. So I have that insight now as to how that happens. And the work that I'm doing now is all around using that knowledge and experience and information to actually have an impact and make it stop. So I'm still interested in solutions.
And do you think that some of these solutions need to be initiatives with the tech and the media and academia and activism? Like this morning, I read this article that happened in the Alps of France, and the police went in and literally took all these kids' computers and everything and went into these homes. The parents were oblivious. All these kids were like 10 years old.
I know.
And when they interviewed them and they said about, this teacher that had been beheaded, their answers were, well, if they hadn't shown that caricature, then it wouldn't have happened, which is, these are 10-year-old kids.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. It's shocking, but the sophisticated way in which they infiltrate the minds, it's quite shocking. We can't underestimate how they use psychology, how they use brainwashing to get, young, vulnerable minds to, and look at it, it is very young, vulnerable minds. They're working with kids. I mean, even I was like only in my early teens when I was recruited, but they use
kid.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So knowing how that happens and looking at how the tactics are, is now something that I want to use to our advantage. So we know what they do, we know who they recruit, we know what their plans are. Using all of this, how can we use it against them? And that's what I'm trying to do with our organization, Groundswell Project. So that was born out of, okay, we've kind of researched it to death. There's no need to do any more like, how does someone become radicalized? It's all out there, but no one's really actually doing anything practical. And that's where my issues lie. Like, actually, let's use the information to do something proactive. And what does that look like?
What does that look like?
Well, like you just said, using the same tactics, activism, media, academia, all of those experiences, tech, everything has to come like holistically as a package. So I've got friends of mine and colleagues who work in all of those spaces. So I'm like, let's collectively come together, because that's what the terror groups do as well, be that far right or Islamist or any religious extremist groups. They don't just tackle things just one by one. They're very strategic and they're very well planned. How can we do the same? So let's plan our action and our ability to fight on a level playing field, as it were. And that looks like, I've got a tech platform now. So it comes from the principle, like, if there is bad in the community, there's also good.
For sure.
How do you find the good? So I was like, well, let's stick to this principle I came up with: find, connect, and amplify. So you find the good people in the communities who are challenging hate, building bridges, building peace. You connect them together, and then you amplify that voice, which is what they are effectively doing as well. So terror groups, they do that. They amplify, all the negativity, and that's all we ever see. That's the only thing we see. But we're not interested in all of, I call them like the gems of society, the gems within the community, who are the kryptonite and the antidote to extremists. And this is not something that I've dreamt up. I've seen it actually happen. That I've seen extremist groups become really defensive and angry about an initiative we put on called Love Thy Neighbor. It was, how can anyone be angry about that? And we had extreme groups come out and say that this shouldn't be happening. It was between a Muslim community and Jewish community, and we were trying to bring them together. And they got so offended by that. And it kind of encouraged me to think like, well, if you're offended by that, we'll do more of it. We'll actually do thousands of Love Thy Neighbor events.
Right.
And like literally kill them with kindness and love. And that's how I've been working at the moment, like just working with community organizations where the heart of that organization is goodwill, love, and peace, connecting them together and using social media to push out all of the positive stuff that's happening on the ground, and seeing how it works. It's so contagious. People are just wanting to do something, get involved in something that's about peace.
Yeah. And so you're obviously targeting specific communities, community leaders that you probably are realizing particular kids who seem to be lost or looking for something or what have you not, is to become part of these groups where you're amplifying the happiness in life and the good things about life and the good things that we do versus amplifying all the horrible things. And that's how they fall down this deep hole to get recruited.
Yeah, exactly. So it's about, my principle is, let's get there first. If they're going to target these groups, the 10-year-olds, they've got a strategy. Let's get there first. Let's, bring them to a space where they feel encouraged, supported, get them into training, get them to meet individuals, mentors that can give them some hope in life, because that's what they prey on. Extreme groups prey on the insecurities of young people. And this experiment almost is, I'm doing it in real life, and I've seen how it's magically transformed communities, and I just want to do more of it. And I think that it's a skill, it's a necessity, and it should be paid for, which is what, as a social enterprise, I'm going to local governments and saying, you need, a kind of community knitting machine that will bring people together and act as a force field against things that are negative.
Completely. So you have a curriculum now,
right? Essentially, that works, right?
Yeah.
If you follow this, you're going to have a group of happy teenagers versus miserable teenagers. And who's supporting you financially, and are you taking that and essentially distributing it across the globe, like you're, where you are versus other cities, places in Europe? Are you taking that to the United States? Like, who are you working with to get that amplified? The UN? Like, who is it?
Well, I'm lucky to be very connected. Through the past 15 years, I've been speaking at the various events and organizations, PopTech, with, I spoke at the UN, and all of this is knowledge that I'm parting with, and people have been very supportive. But ultimately, it's about offering a service that is really, it's not just a nice thing to do. Oh, that isn't that lovely. It's like, it's a necessity.
Yes.
If you want to safeguard your community, if you want to stop the silos, if you want to stop the division, you need to start pushing in the unification. And so I will go to local communities with this service. The police need it. They need to build trust with their communities. Local authorities need to build trust. So it's like a trust building, as a kid, like a community knitting process that we've come up with. And we're like this machine that if you put us in your community, we'll connect you with everybody and make it healthy. Because it's like a garden, like society is like a garden. If you don't tend to it, it will just, deteriorate, and, you'll get all the weeds, and you have to tend to these issues. So I think we've ignored that element and not given much emphasis or importance to it. And actually now people are realizing, oh yeah, maybe we do need to invest in our communities, make sure people are connected. Small businesses, for example, could mentor young people into a profession. There's so much that can happen. Even the community that I'm working with, they have asylum seekers that have come from Europe, and they're in dire need of help. They're really, they're very, very vulnerable. And calling out to the local community saying, asylum seekers need clothes, they need food, and then watching them mobilize is so heartwarming, because people from different religions and backgrounds are coming together to help the vulnerable in their community, and we just facilitate that type of stuff.
That's excellent.
Seeing the beauty of it.
Right, which is, if you look at Europe and you look at how we're going to have so many more people because of climate change, because of so many reasons of why we need to all basically know and enjoy and be happy with each other, right? Get rid of the hatred.
Absolutely. I mean, what you said about going around, Europe and the US, it's a formula that can be used around the world, because we're all human beings, and communities, whether you're in, the middle of Africa to like the Yorkshire in the UK, they're probably identical, because we're all the same in our nature.
Exactly.
So you have like the community
wants to have a good life, roof over their head, food on the table, and family and friends around them.
Yeah, wherever you go in the world.
Wherever you go in the world, I mean, everyone wants some kind of happiness. 9/11, was such a wake-up call in the United States. Now, it might not have been for the government, right? But certainly for people in the United States who had no idea. I mean, I remember my husband was sitting down in Soho and literally like saw the plane fly over low the head. And he was sitting with a bunch of people from South America. And when the plane hit, they stood up, and the guy from South America said, it must be Al Qaeda. And my husband's like, who? A lot has changed since then. Yeah. And so how has terrorism changed since then? And are we making any strides? And what do they do with these kids when they get them in their, in their paws?
Well, it's like peaks and troughs, I guess. With Al Qaeda, they kind of started dying out, and their influence was starting to wane. And then you had ISIS come out after Saddam Hussein had collapsed, and those people were full of revenge, full of anger, full of hatred, and were prepared to do whatever it took to gain power again, because that's what human beings do as well. We're obsessed with power, and and money and
What's going on in our country? Yeah.
So we're obsessed with that, and these guys were, had all the ingredients and motivation to create something as barbaric and absurd and diabolical as Daesh. But with all of that energy, they've used it to, obviously we've seen what happened in 2014 and what chaos they brought. They filled that void, and then it was a time of a lull where they were defeated, and now they're coming back.
Yeah.
It's relentless. They will never stop. So
And why? I mean, I understand it's like they're pulling us, they want to remain something that doesn't exist anymore in the world. And it is power, right? Like the people that they're surrounding them are living like it's, the 1600s. How do you take what you have learned, with this kind of finding, connecting, and amplifying? How do we get inside those communities and make change for happiness versus anger from the time they come out of the womb?
Well, that's it. I think just, we're human beings are really easily influenced. And, when you've got a happy community, most people want to, remain in that happy state. If you've got a hateful community, we'll end up being in that way as well. So it is this battle, but it has to be fought like in a way that is going to have an impact. So it has to be strategic. It has to be purposeful. It has to be funded. Like I've seen with my own eyes, young people that I've spoken with, like I mentor young kids that are having these ideas and try to pull them out. And so when I see that they're going down a certain path, I would be like, well, have you seen this in the community? There's, an interfaith bike ride, like something as simple as that. But it's positive, right? It's something that they haven't seen. And I know this kid loved bikes. And it was something I was like showing him an alternative that he could look at and get involved in, like using a passion of his for something good. And then him seeing something positive for the first time ever, because he'd only seen negative stuff. And it's this battle of good and bad that has to keep going. And having that alternative is the key. And so
Right.
we have to produce that as a society. We're not disconnected to terrorism. We have a responsibility to, maintain our community and make it a place that people feel accepted, of wanted and needed and loved. Everything human beings want, really, isn't it? Like, an identity. And if we can produce that as a society, they won't need to look anywhere else.
That's
And
true.
then that argument then becomes redundant. Another kind of initiative we did, extremist groups always say to young people, you are hated. They do not like you. They do not like your faith, that you are hated. Look at Islamophobia. It's on the rise.
Right.
And then I got a group of young kids and I was like, let's adopt our own definition of Islamophobia. And we'll get the local council to adopt it and the local police to adopt it. And so we gathered a young group of girls and a school, and we came up with our own definition. A lot of young kids got to explain how they feel about being attacked. Some had been attacked, some had been abused, and we got them to write it all out. And we did a workshop basically. And by the end of the workshop, they came up with their own definition of what Islamophobia is to them. And they basically took it to the local council and they adopted it officially. So it showed like, look, we are actually working towards, working in our own community. We're empowered as a community. We can ask the local government to adopt something. And that was an empowering exercise for these young kids. And now if an extremist group comes and says, Islamophobia is on the rise, then they'll be like, but we just made up our own definition. So that argument goes down the trash. So it's like equipping them with all of the arguments and having them have the ability to counter it.
And being acknowledged in their community, right?
Yeah.
I mean, then we're seeing also, and, which I think what you're doing is even more powerful, is this wave of terrorism that's coming from within. And by the way, in every country, all over, they don't have to go to another country to be terrorists. They can just terrorize within their own communities.
Yeah.
How we need to get better at seeing these things that are happening before they happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just like seeing kids that are unhappy that end up having such mental health issues that they choose to commit suicide because no one's paying attention.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same sort of curriculum to pay attention and then figure out how to make an impact.
100%. I mean, all of these things, whether it's they go down the route of terrorism or mental health problems or gang crime or, all of the ills that are there affecting our children is our responsibility to try and tackle as a society. That is society's responsibility to work together. So, terrorism isn't just the issue of all the billions of Muslims in the world. It's just as much as an offense and an upsetting thing for Muslims as well, even more so because we get attacked as a community. And extremist groups know that as well. They know that divide and rule is the good old strategy that
Right.
you divide the community. Yeah. And
you've also talked with Google and Facebook, and certainly all the big tech companies are sitting in Washington these days and are asking about how information is being amplified, not all good, on their sites. And what are the conversations you're having with them about counter, extremism?
So I worked initially with the Google Redirect program. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was in the beginning days when people would make a search because it was like Shake Google was radicalizing everyone. And they were like, this is bad for business. And we need to make sure that we're speaking with the people who can help us. So I was working with Google on the Google Redirect and still am with the think tank Google Jigsaw. And they are very keen to try and make sure that these people are taken off their platform. But I think even Facebook as well, the head of counterterrorism and dangerous organizations also works with the Groundswell Project to try and amplify the good stuff that we're doing. And they are trying to support in their way. But what's come to light is this stuff is almost impossible to get rid of online. It's, they've bitten off more than they can chew. Around 1 or 2 terabytes of information from ISIS was found online. Like, how do you even protect yourself against that?
Right.
So from my perspective, you have to inoculate the communities. So that becomes then redundant and dud. If they are coming to attack you or recruit you, it falls off because you've highlighted that this is a danger. So we have to create awareness in the communities, look after your children, see what they're doing online, training them. So we're having Facebook are training community organizations. So we're facilitating that. There's going to be about 30 grassroots organizations that Facebook will train and tell them what they need to look out for. So it's like mass awareness campaigns.
Right.
So even when I remember when I was young, there was a campaign about not talking to strangers. Like if somebody offers you a sweet, and I remember that in the UK that you can't talk to strangers because it was a big advertising campaign, and a lot of people benefited from from the advert. But it's about that. It's about, okay, we can't take everything offline. That's going to be an impossible feat, like absolutely impossible. But we can help and equip our communities and our young people, our society, with what they need to look out for and the dangers. That is what can be done.
And has COVID, decimated some of these communities? We don't really read about it. We don't even know what's going on in certain communities in our countries that aren't even giving numbers of what's going on.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to feature in a Time magazine article specifically on COVID and how the extremists are going completely online. I mean, they were kind of more or less online anyway, but they have upped their game online. So the article explores how radical groups and terror groups are prolific online. And the way that we have to manage this is, again, like through the education and making sure that people don't become susceptible to it. But they haven't been annihilated because they probably never will be. And that's what we have to come to terms with.
Right. They're never going away.
No, they're just not. but they're just not going to go away.
No,
And we
they're
have
not
to,
going away, right? There will always be terrorists. It could be white nationalism, it could be ISIS. I mean, there will always be some type of terrorism, even down to, the bully at the local school.
yeah.
Mhm.
So what I see is there's a proportion of our society, which I call the persuadables, that if you keep telling them enough times, they will start to believe all of the fake news and misinformation, and they just become persuadable. So before they were, not in that category, but quite easily you can manage to persuade them towards something quite darker. And that's something that we have to be aware of as well. Like, how are we looking at things online? Are we being, taken for a ride? Are we having the wool pulled over our eyes? Those are the questions now everybody should be asking when they go online, so they don't become prey to a lot of the nonsense that's there. And I guess it's about, self-reflecting. We know that there's dangers out there. How do we protect ourselves from it?
Essentially, I mean, it's the consistent theme, which is connection to your community, being happy, and finding joy in yourself and your community, so that you have no interest to go down a dark hole.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
that is everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so, Groundswell should be curriculum that should be taught as early as, in elementary school, in every school across the globe.
Yeah, because it's a strategy as well, because once we've shone a light on the organizations that are doing the good stuff in their community, we then direct, local communities to go and support them and, attend the events, give their time. So it's like, before they weren't known and they were doing the good stuff. And now we're like, come on, everybody, go and join in the good stuff that's happening in your community. Go support your local community activity that's around bridge building, that's around dialogue, that's around helping asylum seekers. So even during COVID, even though there's the dark stuff that's happening, when I looked at the community, people were coming together from all religious backgrounds in a way they never have before, and feeding the people in need and starting to make friendships because they were doing something good together. And that's what I really want to harness, that after this is over, look at how you've come together as a community, you've dispelled the myths, you've built relationships you never would have before. How do we maintain this and not lose it? And the fact is, in order to maintain it, you have to have like a curriculum to make sure that it's happening all of the time in any community, whether that's in Nairobi to Europe, wherever. This type of activity needs to be ongoing.
Right. Well, thank you so much for talking this morning. I mean, honestly, you have taken serious lemons that happened to you and turned it into lemonade. And everyone should be following what Groundswell's done and what you have done, because the thought of being a parent and having some child that you thought was fine and dandy in your home, and finding them being recruited to something so horrific, or even doing something inside the room that you have no idea because they're so unhappy, is really the things that we need to turn around.
100% agreed.
All right.
Agreed.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.